Hi, thanks so much. I think the conversation has moved in this direction, but what's the future? What are the challenges? I mean, you mentioned 40% of employment being independent. Are we going to have 40% of office space be co-working spaces? And then what are the challenges that you foresee? Is it is it in the zoning? Is there a policy shift that needs to happen? We talk about Airbnb, and everyone wants an industrial space on the waterfront with big windows, and there really isn't enough of that. So, your thoughts on the future, I guess.
And just to add on that, co-working as it evolved is you'd have a dedicated co-working space like WeWork where everyone goes to co-work, but we have all of this office space in the United States, and all of these companies is the future of co-working where I invite you into my office or I send you into my partner's office and we start mingling, we start blurring the boundaries between organizations as well as companies. That's my riff on that.
Well, not less so policy, but actually more fundamentally, if we talk about just Department of Buildings. And as an architect, that's kind of the first type policy that we usually bump up against relative to these new co-working spaces. Commercial office space has a certain guideline, and they usually say it's about 100 square feet per person. And therefore, they calculate the occupancy. They don't care how many people you're actually going to put in there, at least by the book. They care about, you call it an office space, you tell us how much square footage, we're going to tell you how many people the Department of Buildings sees in that space. Once you start creating co-working, and then you bring into that lectures or events, or even transitioning to a more structured education, all of a sudden it gets a little murky. Is it public assembly? Is it a school? Is it an adult trade school? And I don't think the Department of Buildings has quite caught up. And so therefore, just to tell kind of a funny anecdote, when General Assembly created their name, we went to the first space and we said, this is General Assembly. We want to do this co-working space. The lawyer of the landlord said, well, can you change your name? And just said, well, curiously, why? Well, it sounds too much like public assembly, and we can't have public assembly in the space. So if you can change it to something else, we'd feel much more comfortable, and we can get insured. So even though that was specific to the name, and obviously they didn't change it, the existing building stock and this, certificate of occupancies, and how, again, from the building department, they still see people living a certain way, and each of those classifications, anyone who's doing residential can tell you those aren't quite working for us either. But the working really needs to change fundamentally.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's the same. You start organizing things in different ways. You get all kinds of issues in terms of labeling, in terms of egress, public assembly, all those things. The other issue, as you point out, is running out of cool old buildings, like spaces like this. Because we toured around. We were looking for the media center. We looked at a lot of buildings down on Wall Street because there's definitely a big desire to get cool companies down in the Wall Street area, and those buildings are frankly often extremely depressing just to walk in the door. There's new buildings from the last, say, 15 years that are actually very nice, but they're extraordinarily expensive. No one can really afford to be in them except for very wealthy companies. And then you have the old buildings, which are great, and everyone likes them. No one cares that there's no, fancy door people and electronic directories and that kind of thing. And then there are all these buildings from, say, the 70s and the 80s, which are, they have the low drop ceilings and kind of iffy infrastructure, and they're just plain depressing to walk into. And that there's going to take a lot of effort to reimagine how we can take back those buildings and create good spaces within them.
Any other closing thoughts?
I just want to add, you did ask about the future, and I do think one interesting idea to think about in a bigger picture is just the softening of the edges around larger companies is something that I think would become really interesting, taking away the idea that a headquarters is sort of like a fortress mentality. I think we've seen a lot of places where the integration of small companies and large is really important, and sharing ideas across them is meaningful. So I think if you could get someone who made a major move, like Google probably is already too much of a thought leader, but let's say you took someone, Coca-Cola, who said, we have this big campus of buildings and all this kind of stuff. We're going to open our doors. We're going to put 1 million square foot of small companies intermingled into our whole campus or whatever it is, in order to create these new bridges of energy and diversity and And I think that kind of thing, more so than just saying like, they're going to convert their own campus to a co-working model. That's cool, they might be looking forward in some way. But if instead they were more like, look, there's a whole world of change out there and we want to embrace it and sort of make our people, instead of sort of fixed inside their box every day, but instead being exposed to a whole bunch of different people, which is what you really get in a co-working space, that would be an amazing future in my mind.
I think that he's absolutely right. I think that there are already some companies that are beginning to do that. I can speak for the Zappos corporate headquarters in Las Vegas. There was this specific intentional driver to create spaces within the corporate footprint that were open to the public for work purposes. And I guess what Miguel is describing is that the very notion of what a company is going to change. And the fact that 40% of us might be contingent workers is maybe the cause or the effect, I don't know, but certainly a lot of these things are emergent and they're beginning to happen, and obviously that affects space in the city and work, but it's quite clear to me that the monolithic building as an office that we used to have is given way to a distributed network of spaces that people can come in and out and call it their workspace, whether it's in a city or whether it's in a corporate campus.
Well, not to end this on too much of a depressing note, but to Miguel's point about the companies willing to do this, I actually put that proposal to the head of the director of workplace for Coca-Cola, who's very progressive. She's trying to do a ride-sharing app with her employees and other large employers in Atlanta for their urban campus. And her response to me was, "We're Coca-Cola, we can't do that."
I want to make a counterpoint to that. We do have Coca-Cola as a member in our Golden Gate building in San Francisco, and I'm not going to say what title it was that was supposedly in the building, but a very high title supposedly was in the building and supposedly went back to the headquarters in Atlanta and said, we should change everything to be like we were. So you never know.
I'll put it to her again. Please, a hand of applause for our panelists.